Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Miscellaneous Myths, Hades and Persephone, Part 2. We left off at 12 minutes flat, so yeah, we're going to hop right back into this. Sending out a lot of love. Don't know if I just said that already, but you know with me. But if you want to send me any videos to watch, leave it down below. And shout out to Overly Sarcastic Productions one more time, and let's watch. Let's finish this up.
Which you may note is quite similar to the Linear B Wanaso Two Queens title. In Arcadia, Persephone was also individually called Despoina, the Mistress, and this gets a bit confusing because Despoina is sometimes described as distinctly separate from Persephone, and by sometimes, I mean exclusively by Pausanias in the 200s AD, fully 800 years after the Homeric hymns, and apparently by nobody else. Other than him, basically everyone seems to recognize that Despoina is Persephone, but it's hard to say for certain, both because mystery cults keep their secrets, and because Despoina's whole deal was that her true name was forbidden. Only those initiated in her mysteries were allowed to know or speak it. So it might have been Persephone, but we're not allowed to know. The Arcadian mystery cult of the Despoina is theorized to straight up predate the Greek-speaking immigrants to the region, so Demeter and Persephone might have originally been the Greekified version of a very ancient duo of spooky eldritch goddesses. Also, fun fact, in Arcadia, Despoina is seen as a child of Demeter and Poseidon rather than Zeus, and more confusingly, everyone involved in that particular story is shaped like a horse. Demeter turns into a horse to outrun Poseidon, Poseidon turns into a horse to chase her down, they have a beautiful horse baby who later grows into Despoina, aka Persephone. That is too many horses. Put those back. But it also does parallel that weird connection we noted between Poseidon and the queens in the Mycenaean version. There's also more confusion about Persephone's name specifically, because in some parts of the mythology, usually when discussing the time before her abduction, she's referred to as Kore, meaning maiden. Now, unlike Persephone, Kore does occasionally get specifically referenced as a nature goddess. But the other weird thing about that is that Kore is a really vague title. Maiden is the classy translation. It's equally valid to say it just means girl. And that sounds a hell of a lot like a vague pseudonym you use when you can't say their name, like in the case of Despoina, and more notably, Hades. See,
I love that literally because I'm watching SCP, so I love that. And like my whole mind is redacted for basically half of what she's talking about with Persephone.
Underworld gods were scary as hell, pun intended, and it was generally believed that calling them by name was a really good way to get their attention, which was a scary bad thing. So rather than saying Hades' name outright, he'd mostly get called by epithets or euphemisms, like the one with many names, or the one who receives many guests, which has the bonus benefit of sounding raw as hell. So we've got Persephone, which is, as near as we can tell,
what the wait.
Or the one who receives many guests, which has the bonus benefit of sounding raw as hell. So we've got Persephone, which is, as near as we can tell, her actual name. But we've also got two extremely vague but...
Wait, she said that sounds raw as hell. Oh, no way. That's a Florida term, isn't it? That just made me think about one of my bros from Florida. Oh my gosh, he says raw all the time when something is dope. That shit's raw as hell.
But very distinct titles, Kore and Despoina, that seem to have been pseudonyms originally arising from people specifically playing it safe and trying not to get her attention. Pre-Socratic philosopher Empedocles
Actually, don't quote me. I don't know if that's a Florida term.
actually calls her Nestis, which supposedly means the fasting one. All these vague nicknames and pseudonyms lend some pretty significant credence to the idea that Persephone's oldest version, whatever it was really, really scary. Like, don't speak her name, you might get her attention scary. And the fact that Persephone has potentially over 1,000 years of secret mystery history, while the first concrete confirmation we have of Hades' existence is the Iliad, is actually kind of reflected in how they're characterized in the actual mythos, because Hades doesn't actually do much. He rules the underworld and shows up whenever someone visits, but he doesn't, like, go out and do stuff. He's pretty passive most of the time. Even in his own core myth, he takes a backseat to the core mother-daughter drama. Persephone and Demeter have so much going on, we literally can't tell how many other goddesses and chthonic rituals might be caught up in their personal mythology. But Hades is exactly what it says on the box. He feels simpler. Now, this might be because the underworld kind of creeped the ancient Greeks out, so they avoided talking, thinking, or writing about it in case they attracted its attention. But while that would explain Hades' broadly inoffensive and generally lawful characterization, it wouldn't really explain why Persephone, also a dread underworld deity, is disproportionately so much more complicated than him. Now, it's impossible to be sure about almost anything about this, but my guess, and this is just me theorizing, is that Persephone as Dread Queen of the Underworld is probably her oldest characterization, and all her other names and versions came from the deliberate vagueness people used when talking about her because of how scary she was. The flowery Kore spring goddess stuff seems to have been a later retcon to give her some pre-underworld lore that wasn't reflected in how she was actually worshipped. And if I can get a little wilder in my speculation, I think Hades might have started off as an offspring offshoot of Mycenaean Poseidon. Now, as we've discussed, Mycenaean Poseidon was king of the underworld, and he had an unclear but definitely extant connection to Demeter and Persephone. In fact, in some Minoan and Mycenaean cults, there was a very widespread duality between the paired figures of a god of the underworld and a goddess of nature. And in the Mycenaean version, that god of the underworld role was filled by Poseidon, and the goddess of nature seems to have been Demeter, although there is some debate over that. The parallels keep popping up, but after the Greek Dark Age, Poseidon was definitely not the king of the underworld anymore, and that connection to
the dolphin.
Despoina was mostly lost, and Hades got it instead. So this might be another Hermes situation, where Hermes started off as a specialized epithet for Pan before getting carved off into his own god. If Poseidon's king of the underworld duties got peeled off during the Dark Age and formed a new god filling an ancient role, that'd account for the discrepancy and why Hades is curiously absent from the pre-Dark Age sources, and barely factors into the Homeric stories either. It'd also potentially indicate that in the pre-Dark Age roots of the abduction story, Poseidon filled some variation of the role that later belonged to Hades. This is 100% my own crack theory, though. I cannot find anyone else making this connection, and there's no ironclad textual evidence to support this. We are fully in the thumbtacks and string zone here. But if there's one thing that we can definitely take away from this, it's
that's how I reference that too when I come up with wild theories. The thumbtack and the string. That's what I'm about to start saying. I'm completely stealing that.
This is a uniquely snarled.
But seriously, I don't even know what it's called. What is that called? I gotta know. I gotta know during this video before we move on. It's impossible. Thumbtack and string. What is it? Is there just no reference? Images come up of literally like the thumbtack and string, but just
part of the mythos. There's a ton of moving parts, epithets, and pseudonyms making everything confusing. This is not helped by the fact that there's also a lot of widely accepted misinformation about the story in general and Persephone specifically. On one side, there's the misinterpretation that Persephone's abduction was a horrifyingly violent assault, which stems from the fact that the ancient word for kidnap has taken on much more unpleasant connotations over the centuries, which was not its original application in the story.
Wait,
and on the other
end of this real statue? What? Why is it so detailed in like a kidnapping?
Assault, which stems from the fact that the ancient word for kidnap has taken on much more unpleasant connotations over the centuries, which was not its original application in the story. And on the other end of the misconception spectrum, there's the fairly modern idea that in the original version of the myth, Persephone willingly walked into the underworld, and the kidnapping thing was a later retcon to strip away Persephone's agency and girl power. I trace this telling all the way back to the archaic era of 1978, when author Charlene Spretnak wrote Lost Goddesses of Early Greece, a collection of pre-Hellenic myths, which was intended to make the mythology more palatable for her young daughter since she didn't want to expose her to all the kidnapping and sexual assault. This book attempted to interpolate what a theoretical pre-patriarchal no-kidnapping version of the myth might have looked like, but it has no sources because there are no pre-Hellenic pre-kidnapping sources for this story. We just don't have them. They don't exist. So this is fanfic. And that's fine. People have been writing Greek mythology fanfic since before there was Greek mythology, but it is definitely not the original version because we straight up do not know the original version. At this point, we'll probably never know the original version. This book was then later adapted by Marjorie Graham, without crediting Spretnak by the way, into a beautifully illustrated...
Who cares about never knowing? Let's just keep whipping up Greek fanfic, Greek mythology.
Telling that advertised
just whip up your own.
Itself as the much older pre-patriarchal version of the myth, and what is thought to be the goddess-worshipping Bronze Age version of the tale, which is the nice way of saying that this is completely unsourced and I hate it. See, this is how misinformation spreads, people. This is cytogenesis in action. Cite your sources or admit you don't have any. But myth conceptions aside, at its core, the story of Hades and Persephone is surprisingly compelling. They are 100% the most functional canon relationship in Greek mythology. Among other things, Persephone is in the extremely rare position of sharing equal power and authority with her husband. They also never cheat on each other, and whenever someone tries to intrude on the relationship by kidnapping or seducing one of them, the other one does something really nasty to the intruder. This is all just canon. We don't even need to sweep any indiscretions under the rug.
This is canon? This is the true celebrity relationship goals. This is the true one right here.
There. And that's why this story is so incredibly popular with modern writers. There are at this point dozens of reimaginings of their relationship, and while some of them lean into the Hades as Satan angle for some easy villainy, most of them focus on the strange and contradictory beauty of the ultimate pastel goth love story. Their relationship started with an arranged marriage, kidnapping, and a near apocalypse, and seamlessly transitioned into the most functional love story in the entire mythos. That is a fascinating scenario for writers to explore, from Lore Olympus reframing the controversial parts of their love story as a matter of unreliable narrators, to Supergiant Games' as Hades, painting
Yep,
Hades and
Hades.
Persephone as deceiving the other gods with the story of the original myth, to Hades Town playing up how strained and tragic their love has become over the years, there's tons of complexities to explore. This story has the worst rep out of any Greek myth because of the whole Hades is bad guy bias we start with,
Yep.
but when we pull back the curtain of societal preconceptions and look at the real story as the ancient Greeks told it, we find a very strange and
laid that down.
surprisingly loving relationship between two very different people. It's beautiful, and it's basically the only relationship in Greek mythology that is actively less horrifying when you read the original version. But
Yeah.
all justifications and recontextualization aside, don't kidnap your loved ones. Not even if their dad tells you to. We know better now. Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire...
Do I want to share this in a video? Is that TMI? Yeah, maybe it's a bit TMI. I was gonna make a little comment on the whole don't kidnap your loved ones. Yeah, probably should not do that. No, I feel like that would make a very unique, interesting ending to a video to end it off, since there wasn't a lot of comments I made, so I'll save it with this little wrap up. First of all, that was really good video. I like the overly sarcastic production, but in all seriousness, yeah, I actually do got a story. So, would this ever come back to haunt me? I don't think it would. Honestly, it's hearsay, so I don't know if any of this is really rooted in fact, but like I was saying in my last video, how most of these stories are just reflections of like what we're going through, because we basically, it's like simultaneously create the gods as the gods simultaneously create us, blah blah blah. That at the end had me weak about not kidnapping your loved ones, because my real father, don't know where he is, he could be in the Caribbean islands, who knows, but as a kid was not allowed to be with that side of my family because my half sister, or full sister, half sister, was kidnapped by them. So that was really funny, and that's why I was never allowed to go ever see them. So yeah, there's fun. Don't kidnap your loved ones and bring them to islands. There we go. I feel like there's a good ending of the story. You're learning something new about Lunar every day. Okay. Other than that, much love and moonlight, and I'm off to the next video. Peace.